I've been playing Diablo 4 since launch, probably for around 100 hours. In short, amazing game, although I would love to see a few changes. So here are 13 things I love about the game and 11 I don't like as much. Hey everyone, Thyworm here, this time with a video on Diablo 4. I'm making a bunch of content on ARPGs, so if you enjoy the genre, I'd appreciate a sub and like. Let's get started with things I love about D4. At number 1, the graphics. Apart from Wolcen, which still looks incredible, Diablo 4 is visually stunning. The lighting, the setting, the ambience while walking around in pretty much any part of the world, it is phenomenal. This may be the best looking ARPG to date, and that Blizzard polish shines through here quite nicely. Closely aligned with that is number 2, the world building. I simply adore the attention to detail the devs added to this world. Everywhere you go, you can find pieces of scrolls, statues, clues, there's lore everywhere, and my initial doubt about an open world which could feel empty and barren has been replaced by pure joy traveling around Sanctuary. It's very impressive what has been created, and still, after all this time playing, I can't get enough of just walking around, killing stuff and discovering new things hidden in the world. And just wait until people discover that secret cow level, it's gonna go ham. Completing the trinity here with number 3, sound and music. Blizzard has amazing soundtracks in all of their games, and Diablo 4 is no exception. The music while in town is calm and serene, with pads and plucking string instruments, while boss fights have a more bombastic soundtrack, especially while making it to the end of a nightmare dungeon or a pinnacle boss. The pacing is well done, the timing is great. The only criticism one might have here, I suppose, is that parts of the world have basically no music at all, and while exploring the world you may only hear ambient noises, but no real music. Number 4, the campaign. In quite a few ARPGs I cannot be bothered to learn what the campaign is about. It is typically not voice acted, there are typically no cinematics, and I don't play these games to read a bunch of text balloons. An exception would be Wolcen once again, which has a very solid, enjoyable campaign. With Diablo 4, however, I was very curious about the campaign, and the game does a good job reeling you into the story. You're starting out being saved by a mysterious wolf, which turns out to be much more than just that. Then you are part of this village, which wouldn't be off script in a Resident Evil game, and then the game really opens up with the main antagonist, Lilith. Following Lilith through Sanctuary, meeting a bunch of interesting NPCs, watching the incredible movies, and listening to all the conversations, it was pure bliss. And I would argue reason enough to buy the game. That is how good this story is. Which holds true for side quests as well, by the way. Some of those are quite fun to do, and I don't say that lightly in a hack and slash ARPG. Talking about hack and slash, number 5 is the combat feel. Another standout feature in my opinion. Part of what makes Diablo 4 such a compelling game to play is the moment-to-moment gameplay. I've played 3 classes so far, a sorcerer, rogue and necromancer, and all of those classes feel good to play, except minions, they suck. Killing monsters is very satisfying because of the animations, the sound, the graphics, the gore, the whole package really. And since you're spending a lot of time killing monsters, it's important this feels good, meaty, visceral, and it does. I also appreciate that most monsters have very telegraphed attacks, which makes combat mostly feel a test of skill instead of a test of button mashing or gearing. As visual clarity so far is mostly fine, that helps making combat feel good because you know you're not being one-shot by some bullshit mechanic. There are some exceptions, but we'll get to that. Number 6. Playing together with others in the open world. I stated before I was a bit worried about the open world. I just didn't see how it would add too much to an ARPG like Diablo. But I'm happy to say the open world and seeing other players in it makes the whole thing come alive, like I never expected it would. Open world events you complete with each other, world bosses you group up for, hell tides you do in a party, or Legion, it is enjoyable. You're incentivized to do so due to an experience bonus, and all in all, I think it was a great move, this open world and a bunch of players in it. Number 7. Finding cosmetics and mounts. I appreciate that you're able to find cosmetics and mounts in the world, like a spectral horse or trader armor for your horse. It makes you want to explore, kill random stuff and reap those rewards, rather than going to a cash shop and buying a mount for real money. I understand Blizzard needs ongoing revenue from Diablo 4 to keep the game profitable, and I also understand selling MTX in the store. It's probably the best way to monetize a game like this, but I'm happy they didn't skimp on the items you can find in the world by simply playing the game. Number 8. Closely related to this, the Transmog system. I am normally not someone that cares too much about looks. I do buy plenty of support packs to support grinding gear games, and I probably will do something similar here, but that is mostly for support, not really for MTX or cosmetics. I do appreciate how much effort Blizzard put into the Transmog system, however, in Diablo 4, and I've been playing with it quite a bit. I've almost unlocked every item on the rogue, and you can absolutely make some badass looking characters by tinkering with this feature. There's a lot of player expression to be had here, and I see the value of making a character completely your own. It shows in the world as well, because almost no one looks similar thanks to the items and color schemes available, which is impressive. Number 9. Making a build. This may be a weird pro. You can make a build in any ARPG, you would think. But I mean how easy it is to make a build. A build that does well up to level 70 or so. Creating a build is rather straightforward, I would argue, and with only limited knowledge about the damage buckets, you can create a build as you go. At the start, respeccing is very forgiving. The skill tree is rather simple and understandable. Itemization isn't overly complex, but there is some depth and some build-defining aspects. Plus, the Paragon board may seem overwhelming at first, but once you know what you're looking for, it is not that hard to pick a Paragon board that makes sense. Put some glyphs into it and go ham. I've created my own rogue build. I'm now level 68 and so far I've had quite a smooth experience. My first character followed a build guide, the Ice Shard Sorcerer from Crypt, and while that was a great build, it also took away the fun of experimenting yourself and coming up with your own testing and ideas. There are games where I would not recommend making your own build at the start, like Path of Exile, but in Diablo 4 you can definitely do this, and in my opinion, you should. I've had a lot more fun making something myself, rather than going for something super strong, super meta. And you don't need to have something super strong, because Endgame offers no reason for that. Closely related to number 9 is number 10, character progression up to level 70. I think another strength of Diablo 4 is how smooth the progression is of your character up to around level 65 or 70. There are classes that start out slow, like the Druid apparently. I found the Sorcerer also quite slow, but there is this constant sense of progression. You're unlocking more aspects you can put on gear. You're progressing the campaign if you're doing that. You're doing Renown for those bonuses. There's more and more gear you find. First regular gear, then sacred gear, and then ancestral gear. You're making your way through the world tiers to get that gear, making enemies harder, but once you have upgraded your items, you're usually completely fine. The capstone dungeons are there with a few interesting bosses. It's a very balanced, smooth learning curve until level 70-ish. And then it's just quite a grind. And it is at that point I quit or re-rolled, but we'll get to that. Number 11 may be a bit contradictory to my previous point, but it is the endgame variety. You might think that because there's quite a lot of endgame variety, it feels good to progress as well after level 70, but those two don't necessarily go hand in hand. Progress after level 70 is tedious and boring in my opinion. However, in terms of endgame activities, the game does offer a lot, and I think it is mostly a matter of tweaking or adding another world tier to fix the situation. Endgame comes in quite a few forms. There are legions, which spawn roughly every 25 minutes or so, where enemies pop out of the ground, you kill them, you kill some more, and then you kill a boss, and you do this whole thing 3 times, and then you get some decent rewards in a chest. There's the Tree of Whispers, a tree with a bunch of hanging heads. It reminded me a bit of Game of Thrones, and that tree also gives you loot after you complete specific activities in the world. This loot, once again, can be decent, especially if you're not decked out in ancestral gear just yet. There are world bosses, which are quite fun to do, but are essentially loot pinatas. Especially now that people reach level 100 and are super strong, these world bosses drop like flies. But at the start of the launch or at the start of a season, they do offer a fun challenge, and the gear they drop is worth it. You can do regular dungeons or the more difficult version, nightmare dungeons, which upgrade your glyphs, which offer tons of player power. And finally, there are Hell Tides, where hell is pouring down on a zone in Sanctuary, and you need to kill demons to collect orange stones, and those can be used to open chests. Some of those chests, the mystery ones, offer special crafting items and a bunch of legendary items, making Helltide mandatory pretty much. As a result, a ton of people are doing it. All in all though, in terms of stuff to do, there is plenty. It's just that after some point, most of these activities aren't useful anymore. And then ultimately, there is one pinnacle boss, Uber Lilith. This boss, however, is so out of range and so difficult for 99.5% of the player base that it is hardly worth even mentioning as a pro. Also, she apparently drops no worthy loot, which is quite weird. This brings me to number 12, the overall state of the game. All things considered, meaning this is Blizzard making a AAA Diablo game, you would be lying if you claimed this game at launch wasn't the full package. Diablo 4, in terms of bugs, stability, content and polish, may be the best AAA game release of the last few years. It's up there, for sure. I can't think of another AAA game in the last 5 years that launched so smoothly, has so much content, has such a great campaign, looks insane, and plays like a charm. Drop it in the comments, I suppose, if you got a better candidate, but either way, this is commendable. Also commendable is number 13, the developers. These devs have been listening to and acting on feedback since they started communicating about Diablo 4. These devs seem to do everything in their power to make Diablo 4 an amazing game, and so far they have succeeded. Diablo 4 is a lot better than I initially gave it credit for. I just really hope that the Blizzard management sees the value in having a AAA title not devoured by needless pay-to-win MTX, and hopefully the devs can keep convincing their superiors the game needs to stay in a state like this. It's not very likely this will happen, given the history of Blizzard and their tendency for greed and revenue, but one can dream. Now, onto the things I don't like, but not before I say this. Quite a lot of these are much more minor cons compared to the pros. And also, since I've just given you 13 pros, I do really like this game. Keep that in mind. Number 1. No overlay map. While I understand the idea of immersion, which is definitely achieved by having no overlay map, it is such a staple of the hack and slash ARPG genre that you have an overlay map that it is sorely missed. In the open world, it's not so bad because the open world is static and at some point you know the way. But in dungeons, which are procedurally generated and have their objectives in different places all the time, the minimap simply doesn't cut it. I am constantly opening the big map and closing it again, just to navigate a dungeon, and it feels bad. Also, it lags my game. Please devs, step over this immersion argument and give us an overlay map. Number 2, also quite a big one, no loot filter. I don't think this needs much explaining, but especially for those who don't have a level 70 or so character yet, at level 70-ish, you're basically completely decked out in uniques and ancestral legendaries with the correct aspects. There is very little loot you are interested in, but still everything shows up. Flasks, scrolls, sacred items, ancestral items, even bloody white ones, legendaries, and then what you're actually looking for, uniques. A loot filter, even a basic one with loot rarity on it, would save players so much time, and I hope it will be implemented quickly. Number 3. Monster scaling. I understand scaling has advantages for group play and that you can basically quest in the open world wherever you want, but at higher levels this scaling becomes very problematic. Everyone can see that. There should be a limit to the monster scaling because now they endlessly scale and become more powerful, and because your character doesn't get much stronger after level 70, you are effectively becoming weaker once you level up, and that should never happen in a video game. Leveling should feel good, and with scaling monsters, it feels bad. This is a problem that somehow needs to be addressed. The devs could cap scaling at like level 83, like Path of Exile does, or they could add another world tier with new loot, so your character feels much stronger at higher levels, or maybe there are other solutions, but something needs to happen here. Number 4. Crafting. There basically is no crafting. Yes, you can upgrade gear, but it is super linear, and yes, you can imprint an aspect, which is once again super linear, and yes, you can gamble a single affix for insane amounts of gold, but that is not crafting in my mind. It is way too simplistic. Crafting would be fun in the sense of finding a blue item with a stat you really want, like +4 to poison traps, and then being able to somehow add affixes to that, actual crafting. This doesn't exist in Diablo 4, and I think it's a shame because it renders everything that is not ancestral rare useless. Number 5. Stash and inventory space. There's just not enough of it. Finding legendaries, extracting aspects, storing gems and uniques, and simply putting stuff in your stash for alts to use is not really an option, because you have so little stash and inventory space. I don't like it, but I'm guessing this will be sold for real money, and I'll probably buy it. Number 6. Running to nightmare dungeons. Currently, when you activate a nightmare dungeon, you have to run over there, which takes a lot of time, takes you out of the flow, and it is quite tedious. The devs said this will be fixed, however. I think in Season 1 you'll be teleported to the dungeon in the future. Number 7. Related to dungeons, the dungeon variety. There is hardly any dungeon variety, and while the game offers apparently 120 or so dungeons, they might have as well offered 12, because it wouldn't have mattered. You are constantly doing the same objectives, over and over again, from collecting useless cubes and stones, to slaying certain bosses, to killing all enemies in a section of the dungeon. It is very boring, quite tedious, and some variety here would be much appreciated. Number 8. Still dungeons. The dungeon affixes in nightmare dungeons. Some of these affixes are incredibly annoying. Not challenging, simply annoying. And ARPGs should really, in general, have a good hard look at some of the map modifiers they subject their player base to. Whether it's Path of Exile with all these slow and hinder effects, or Last Epoch with slow and chill you cannot prevent in any way, or Diablo 4 this time with this weird crystal that creates a dome, and if you're not under it, you're being one-shot by lightning, or a sort of obelisk following you around and frying you. I don't see who thought this was a great idea. You're killing monsters and all of a sudden you get one-shot because you failed to see the indicator on your character, or the obelisk who's hiding in the pack of elites that you're decimating, and now you are dead, having to run all the way back. It's a fun sponge and should be gone from an action ARPG. Number 9, a small one, but the horse cooldown. I hate it. Either give me a mount or don't, but don't give me a mount and then prevent me from using it for 10 seconds. If the mount gets killed by skeletons, that's all fair game, but me just dismounting and mounting again? Come on devs, my mount is still alive, it is a spectral ghost anyway, it's still around, no need for a cooldown here, let's be honest. Number 10, another small one, but while generally server state is fine, I do have the occasional lag spikes like you're seeing here. For softcore, not a huge issue, but it is pretty clear servers do have a few issues now and then. It claimed many hardcore characters already, and I just hope for that community in particular, Blizzard gets a grip on these server issues and fixes them. Small complaints though, especially from a softcore perspective. Number 11, the final one, and the reason why I'm pretty much not playing anymore, the progression after level 70. It's a massive grind basically, and I have a few issues with it. First, the scaling. This is the only ARPG I can remember where you feel weaker the higher level you get. Very strange the devs didn't pick up on that in testing. Furthermore, I enjoy playing an ARPG to work towards content I cannot do at the moment, but once I get stronger, I can. The map and atlas progression in PoE is a good example of that. Clearly harder content and you're clearly getting stronger, and at some point you demolish tier 16 maps. Diablo 4 doesn't really have this. Sure, the nightmare dungeons are level based, but there's no real reason to do them. It's all still the same. I'm not getting much better loot. There's no real content to work towards apart from the insanely difficult Uber Lilith. Why am I playing and grinding this endgame? For me there's pretty much no reason because there's no meaningful progression after level 65 or so. Last Epoch has the same problem. Why am I running the monolith at some point? Only because I can do higher corruption? That's not a good reason for me. I want to play new content, not the same content that's a little bit harder. PoE excels here and offers pretty much infinitely more endgame progression with all the content it has to offer and all the different endgame progression systems, whether it's heist and decking out rogues, making your way to Uber bosses, or doing delve with that progression system. There's always something to strive towards, and it isn't just a more difficult version of what you're already doing. Diablo 4, however, does not have that. It may be there in Season 1, but for now I have no incentive to keep grinding. Let's draw a conclusion. I think Diablo 4 has an extremely solid base game, a skeleton framework it can build on, and I'm super excited for what Season 1 brings. I have definitely already had my money's worth and my complaints pale in comparison to the pros, I would say. I'll keep covering D4 in some more videos, and for now I hope you enjoyed this one and found it useful. If you have any more questions, please post them in the comments, I'll try to reply. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all, see you soon, bye bye.